Today, we're here to update Canadians on the upcoming wildfire season. Avant de commencer, je voudrais reconnaître que nous sommes réunis sur le territoire traditionnel non cédé de la nation Algonquin-Anishinaabe. I would also like to remind everyone that it is Emergency Preparedness Week this week, and the theme is Be Prepared, Know Your Risks. We want to highlight the importance of being prepared for disasters to all Canadians. La première étape, c'est de s'informer sur les risques possibles au sein de votre communauté et d'en prendre plus sur les mesures pour limiter les risques et vous protéger, vous et votre famille. As we all know, last season was the worst wildfire season on record, but it could have been so much worse without the hard work and sacrifices of firefighters all across this country. Davantage de communautés et de familles auraient pu toutes perdre sans les efforts qui ont déployés tout au long de la saison pour maîtriser les incendies et aider aux évacuations. Je tiens à exprimer une nouvelle fois ma gratitude et celle de nos gouvernements pour tout ce qu'ils vous faites alors que nous nous apprêtons à vivre un nouvel été qui pourrait s'avérer difficile. I'd like to now turn it over to Minister Sajjan to provide us with his updates. Merci.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Sherry. Thank you for joining us for today's update on the wildfire situation in Canada. But before I begin, I just want to say congratulations to the Vancouver Canucks win last night. My condolences to my colleagues who supporting Edmonton. But at the same time, it's great to see two Canadian teams in the playoffs. So first, and I also want to just take this opportunity to thank all the firefighters and the public safety personnel for their incredible work to keep all Canadians safe. A month ago, we warned Canadians to expect another bad wildfire season this year, and we urge everyone to be prepared. I can say that to date, there are 87 wildfires burning, and 6 are burning out of control. Approximately 1.47 million hectares have been burned so far, and right now, wildfires are active in the following areas. So key areas of concern include BC Interior, northeastern BC, which have high combustible material, northern Alberta, with several small and out-of-control fires. Southern Northwest territories are entering a drier period post-thaw. Now, despite these risks, air quality remains high nationwide, and also a rapid warming trend next week is expected to worsen conditions in these high-risk areas, necessitating close situational awareness and vigilant monitoring of weather patterns and regional reports. And as of today, the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre, the national preparedness level remains at level 1. Despite the situation in Western Canada, we remain hopeful for other regions in the country. Now, many areas have been fortunate to see heavy rain. If these weather patterns continue, other regions in Canada may not have the severe wildfire season that we had last year. However, that being said, thunderstorms can increase the risk of fire activity. So again, I urge all Canadians to begin preparations. Climate change is here, and it is real, regardless of what Pierre Poilievre might say. It is on our doorsteps, impacting our lives and livelihoods and threatening our communities. It is also costly. Climate-related impacts are now costing average Canadian households $720 per year today, and if left unchecked, it could increase to approximately $2,000 per year by 2050. In 2023, Canada's severe weather caused over $3.1 billion in insured damages. Now, you may hear Pierre Poilievre and his Conservative politicians downplay this reality and dismiss the science. What you will not hear from them is a plan to do the work to protect Canadians and tackle the real threat of climate change. Now, Canadians deserve and want a government that will tackle climate change and not leave the fight to its children or grandkids. And also, as I've already mentioned, this week is Emergency Preparedness Week. The theme is Be Prepared, Know Your Risks. When it comes to wildfires, the most important thing we can do is prevent through awareness and education. I encourage all Canadians to check out the Fire Smart program online. It can help you protect your home and community. For additional information, Canadians can also check out the wildfire pages on Canada.ca for updates and access to government services. The reality of wildfires and climate change is especially dramatic in First Nations communities all across the country. 80% of the communities are at a risk of wildfires. And it is crucial we work in collaboration with them and support their self-determination because they know what's best for what they need. Now that is what we are doing through Budget 2024 by adding $166 million to better support communities prepare for and fight wildfires. We're also doing things differently this year by offering advance payments to all communities so they can prepare earlier, incorporating traditional knowledge in their strategies and funding emergency management coordinators in more communities. I also want to be clear today with Indigenous partners, this will be a difficult season, but we will be by your side before, during, and after wildfires. Our government believes in climate change, and we are acting on it, and we want to support your self-determination and leadership and not impose a one-size-fits-all solution on you. We're also committed to ensuring that Canadians can get the help they need in emergencies. To bolster our emergency response capacity, I would like to highlight a new initiative under the federal government's Humanitarian Workforce Program. This initiative will provide a wider range of response capabilities heading into the wildfire season, ensuring that non-governmental organizations can mobilize rapidly and surge in emergency responders and supplies to provide immediate relief to Canadians in times of need. Now, it includes the Canadian Red Cross, St. John Ambulance, Salvation Army, and the Search and Rescue Volunteer Association of Canada, short, we call it SARVAC. SARVAC will have a new mission-ready group of approximately 200 volunteers from across the country that will be deployable for up to 3 weeks within 72 hours of time frame. The Salvation Army will be repositioning assets and supplies such as non-perishable food in 5 high-risk areas in BC and 2 in the Northwest Territories to allow for fast response if and when it is needed. And St. John's Ambulance has a roster of approximately 10,000 frontline volunteers and 5,000 volunteers for the Canadian Red Cross that remain ready to be called upon to help and support Canadians. To begin with, this pilot will focus on British Columbia and the Northwest Territories, given the heightened level of risk and recent experiences in these regions. I'm also announcing plans for Team Rubicon, a veteran-led humanitarian organization that will be joining the Humanitarian Workforce Program. This will enhance our urgent response capacity and leverage the incredible experience, knowledge, and skills of former Canadian Armed Forces members. We are also very grateful for the enhanced capacity provided by these organizations and their contributions to keeping Canadians safe, particularly as we deal with the increasing effects of climate change. So as we expected, this year's wildfire season is already taking a toll on Western Canada. Evacuations, poor air quality, distressing images can have a significant impact on the physical and mental health of Canadians. So I urge all Canadians to look out for one another. We are Canadians, and this is what we do. For local directions, follow local directions and stay prepared. We will get through this together. If you do not already have an emergency kit, visit getprepared.ca to find out what you need to build one and create a plan for your household and practice it. Finally, I would like to once again thank the many individuals who are tirelessly working to fight the wildfires and to keep us all safe. All Canadians owe you a debt of gratitude for your efforts. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. And now I'll turn it over to Minister Guilbeault.
Merci, Harj. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Hello, everyone. Les météorologues d'Environnement et Changement climatique Canada travaillent jour et nuit, 24 heures par jour, 7 jours sur 7, pour prévoir tous les événements météorologiques partout au pays. Aucune autre fonction fédérale n'est aussi présente dans la vie quotidienne de la population. Le climat canadien se réchauffe environ 2 fois plus vite que la moyenne mondiale et nous nous dirigeons vers des risques accrus d'incendies de feux de forêt au cours des prochains mois. Il est important de se préparer et d'avoir les outils nécessaires pour nous adapter et mieux réagir. Les changements climatiques affectent déjà notre climat, mais aussi notre réalité et la façon dont les gens au pays vivent et travaillent. Canadians face a time of ongoing extreme weather events, and we are taking action. In addition to cutting the pollution that is driving climate change, we're helping Canadians in adapting to our current reality. Today, I would like to highlight an investment of almost $212 million in high-performance computing, which enables our Meteorological Service of Canada to predict future conditions, including those that lead to extreme weather events. Canada also provided $643 million over 10 years to help the Meteorological Service provide life-saving information on weather, water quantity, climate, ice, and air quality conditions across Canada on a 24/7 basis. I'm talking about higher quality data for all prediction, an increased ability to detect nearby storms, and better overall severe weather forecasting and detection. I should also note that tomorrow I will be visiting a state-of-the-art weather radar station just outside Montreal in Blainville, Quebec. It's just one of 32 newly modernized radars across the country, giving Canada a fully modern network of reliable radars with greater range and accuracy. These radars improve our ability to track and detect severe weather so that we can alert Canadians earlier about what is coming. Afin de prévenir la multiplication des phénomènes météorologiques extrêmes, nous devons également agir dès aujourd'hui. Nous devons nous adapter aux impacts des changements climatiques que nous subissons actuellement et cesser d'aggraver le problème de la pollution qui alimente cette crise coûteuse pour nos enfants et leurs enfants. Thank you, merci. Je passerai maintenant la parole à mon collègue et ami. Je dirais presque qu'on a gardé le meilleur pour la fin, Jonathan Wilkinson.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tous. We certainly talk about climate change a lot these days. The planet, as folks will see, is effectively burning up, and climate change is a significant factor. As folks will know, last summer, Canadians experienced the most destructive forest fire season in our country's history. The federal government is working aggressively to ensure that Canada is prepared to respond to wildfires this season and into the future. Mais de nombreuses leçons ont également été tirées sur la manière dont nous pouvons être encore mieux préparés face à ces incendies. Earlier today, the Government of Canada experts led a wildfire forecasting briefing to share what the data is telling us this wildfire season may look like. Unfortunately, this forecasting continues what has become an alarming but somewhat predictable trend of hot, dry summers that present the perfect conditions for intense fires. Spring wildfire activity is expected to be above normal in areas that have been experiencing prolonged, multi-year droughts, including eastern British Columbia, the central and northern parts of the prairies, and the southern parts of the Northwest Territories. Si vous vivez dans l'est de l'Ontario ou dans l'ouest du Québec, il se peut que vous connaissiez aussi une saison de feux de forêt plus active que d'habitude. Moving into June, our forecast shows that the wildfire-prone area is likely to expand to cover most of the Northwest Territories, Yukon, British Columbia, and northwestern Alberta. This underscores the importance of wildfire mitigation and adaptation. This government has made significant and long-term investments since 2015. I would just highlight a few of those investments. Last year, we announced and then we fast-tracked agreements with provinces and territories to deliver over $250 million in equipment, which is supporting procurement of life-saving equipment and personnel for the 2024 season. We also announced $38 million to fund the training of additional firefighters and are on track to train 1,000 additional firefighters by the end of this year, which is 3 years ahead of schedule. And last month, I was pleased to announce an $800,000 increase in funding for the International Association of Firefighters to bolster their highly successful program that trains municipal firefighters to fight fires in the municipal wildland interface, which, as folks in places like Kelowna will know, is extremely and increasingly important. Dans le cadre du budget 2024, nous doublons les crédits d'impôt pour les volontaires des services d'incendie. And today I am pleased to speak about new investments to support firefighting through the Resilient Communities Fire Smart program. This includes $1.2 million we will be providing to the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre, or CIFC, to increase staffing capacity and to build awareness of Fire Smart. This funding will help CIFC to support provincial and territorial efforts in expanding Fire Smart. As many folks will know, Fire Smart is CIFC's national program that provides information and resources to the public to prevent, manage, and fight wildfires. Its campaigns help to protect homes across the country from fires and educate the public about the shared role that governments and communities play in stopping their spread. Additional federal funding beyond the funding being announced today will be delivered on a cost-share agreements basis to increase Fire Smart's reach in partnership with provinces and territories. Several such agreements are presently under negotiation. More information on these agreements will follow in the coming weeks. The Fire Smart program recognizes the parts we all play in staying informed of the science and preventing the spread of wildfires when they occur. As a federal government that values science and is committed to supporting communities, we are there to provide supports where they are needed and when they are needed. Wildfires have always occurred across this country. What is new is their frequency and their intensity. And the science is clear. The root cause of this fact is climate change, human-caused climate change. That is why Canada has one of the most comprehensive climate plans in the world, and why we are continuing to move forward on it every day. Certainly, government's most important priority must be to protect Canadians' lives and livelihoods. And increasingly, this starts with accepting the scientific reality of climate change and taking thoughtful, impactful action to address it. Canadians deserve and expect thoughtful action from their politicians about the risks that climate change poses to our children's future, to our economy, and certainly to our communities. That is exactly what this government has done and will do tomorrow and the next day and the next. So thank you for joining us today. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Nous allons maintenant procéder à la période de questions. Nous allons commencer par les questions ici dans la salle et ensuite nous allons passer en ligne. Si vous êtes sur Zoom, s'il vous plaît, utilisez la fonction « Lever la main » pour que je puisse vous reconnaître. So if you're attending on Zoom, please use the raise hand function at this moment so I could hand you the mic after a few questions here in the room. First off, David Aiken, Global News.
Thank you, David Aiken, Global News. Thank you, Ministers, for the briefing. You know, it's just the question, maybe I'll put this to Minister Sajjan, sort of, I think all of you talked about ways everybody's better prepared this year than last year. I think these briefings, I don't know if we had these briefings last year, is one way. Can you just give me what you think is some of the most important focus? Was it coordination? Was it resources? Was it education? Can you talk about the transition leading into this wildfire season, what you see as the biggest improvements to be better prepared?
It's a great question, David. I would say that probably the biggest improvement, I can't pick one in terms of from the coordination side, but the biggest one has been in how we've been learning from one another. The lessons learned, I visited almost every disaster from last year, and learning from one another to say what were those gaps and what are the efficiencies that we needed to create. Sometimes, as you know, when it comes to any type of emergencies, it's you might have the resources, but it may not be in the right place at the right time. So one of the key things that we've been focusing on is how do we change this? So our coordination is much better. In fact, actually, our officials meet quite regularly throughout the year. I, as a minister, meet with my counterparts, Indigenous leaders as well. In fact, actually, I just came from the Yukon and saw the preparation that the Yukon is doing for wildfires. It was actually quite amazing to see. If I can just share some of the knowledge, and I was telling them, I said, we need to bring this up at the next FPT meeting. Their Fire Smart program to protect Whitehorse, so their analysis was if there was a fire, they're looking at which direction it would come. So the fire break that they're creating was not just clear cutting. They took all the real silence that was provided, and what they did was they turned that into an economic business for what the wood that they're using. But they're also using those 2 billion trees that we're planting, that program as well, into their program. And what they've also done is trained more people to respond more efficiently and taking the satellite information that they get and respond very quickly to put the fires out. So what they've been able to do is look at responding at their level so that they potentially don't even need greater resources. What that allows for us to do is put those resources in other areas that will be needed. So I would say that is learning from one another is probably one of the best things that we've done last year, and then putting that information to use. And even the humanitarian workforce concept and how we're utilizing it is based on what we learned last year of making sure we have the right people, not just to fight the wildfires, but also to making sure that you have people there to do the registration, making sure that the food is there, the medical support, and also preparation of the camps, so that the firefighters are not dealing with running the camps; they're actually there to fight the wildfires.
If I may add, David, one of the things that the Meteorological Service of Canada is doing, there's 2 pilot projects that we've initiated since last year. One is to have the ability to communicate in real time extreme weather event information to provinces, territories, Indigenous nations, and municipalities. And the other one is on communications with the public and with various agencies across the country so that they have quick access to this information, which can be then communicated back to their public and to Canadians in general.
Actually, Minister Guilbeault, it dawned on me when you were making your remarks that normally we think firefighting is sort of a low-tech business, water, axes, shovels. But you talk about the new investment in radars, in probably some supercomputing, different platforms for that. Can you just give me a little more detail about that regard? Are those new systems online this year? Is it something that's going to be coming on next year? Can you just speak a bit more about the detail of how the high-tech is being used to prepare us for wildfires?
I'll certainly speak to that, and I think maybe Jonathan can talk about the other element, which is satellite detection. So, I mean, basically, in the last 10 years, it's close to $1 billion that we've invested both in higher computing capacity to be able to make weather forecasts and an extreme weather event. I'll give you a very concrete example. It's not forest fire related, but Fiona. Due to those investment, our scientists were able to predict the path that Fiona was going to take to some hundreds of meters in precision, which allowed us to warn people, local authorities, fishermen, which, I mean, there were still unfortunate death related to Fiona, but it could have been much worse. Number one, and number two, so there's investment in better computing capacity, but also, as I said, investment in better radar technology, which increases the range and accuracy of our radar system across the country. So better detection, better data gathering on the one hand, and better capacity to analyze that data and provide real-time information to provincial, territorial, local authorities to be able to act quickly.
Yeah, and I would just say with respect to satellite technology, I mean, we have obviously been using satellite technology for some time, but there have been advances. And on the Canadian side, we actually launched a program which is called Wildfire Sat, which will result in our own system, which will be deployed a few years from now, that will greatly enhance the work that we are doing. In the interim, we actually have developed a closer relationship with the Americans in terms of how we are actually collaborating. And one of the things that we are doing is leveraging their Fire Guard satellite system, which actually gives us much more precision, timely data to be able to actually understand what's happening and how to respond. I would say that certainly strengthening relationships with some of our partners who have helped us out last year and who we have helped out in the past has also been very positive. That's not just the Americans, there are a number of others, but certainly with the Americans we've renewed that relationship, and that involves things not just shovels on the ground, but also things like satellite data.
And just to add to this is also some of the other technologies we're looking at. One of the key things is how do you fight wildfires at night? So some companies are qualified to do this. As you know, it's extremely dangerous work. In Canada, we do have a few. And how do we put the right technology into this? There is actually one company that I've met that's looking at conducting research right now on a pilot project on how to use drone technology using swarming to fight wildfires. So imagine being able to put out a fire at night. West Kelowna, because that lightning strike was so close to the town, air assets couldn't be used at that time. And so just imagine if we were able to put that fire out, we wouldn't have had that horrific disaster in West Kelowna. But also, let's look at FireSmart. FireSmart takes a lot of science behind it to making sure it's not about clear cutting. It's actually about making sure that we have the right vegetation in the place so that it actually slows the fire down, so it becomes a fire that the firefighters on the ground can actually fight and prevent. But probably the most important thing that I learned last year when it comes to FireSmart, if you do FireSmart right, it's about the regrowth of the actual forest. When it's not, it scorches the earth about 4 to 5 feet down. And what I was told in places like West Kelowna that I saw personally is that that soil is burned for about 100 years. And so now imagine with the flash flood situation, it creates other potential disasters as well. So putting that science behind it, and I know there's some work that BC is doing with some private companies right now, and we're looking at how we can do it in other parts of the country and look at what type of vegetation will be needed, because as you know, the needs of the north and the Arctic is going to be very different from what the needs in the south are going to be.
Next up, Mia Rapson, Canadian Press.
Yeah, Minister Sajjan, I'm just wondering if you could provide a little bit more information about the new volunteer program, how it's different than what we had in place last year, how it'll be improved. Will it be able to be sharing these volunteers across provinces much more easily? Just a little bit more detail on how that's actually going to work.
Question. So what we had was with the humanitarian workforce concept, it was kind of created during the COVID pandemic. Making sure that we increase capacity for provinces for the specialized need, because as much as we have called upon CAF is not the best resource to deal with a lot of these emergencies. So what we've been doing is providing funding to increase the capacity of the various organizations. And what we're doing now is looking at exactly how many people are actually available. What actually skill set will they bring to the table? So that way, the provinces now will have a better understanding through the Government Operations Center of if there's a certain need, here's a resource that can be applied. We know exactly who's needed. We'll actually have people from the organization working directly at the Government Operations Center. So they'll be part of the whole operational planning process. So it'll give, they'll be available across the country, but we are conducting the 2 pilot projects for us so that we can analyze better this year and what the actual needs will be and how to make this work. And I would say that as we talk about the need for fighting wildfires, what we tend to forget is sometimes when there's evacuation, that's when there's a significant anxiety for Canadians. Making sure that Canadians can be registered very quickly so that you can get the appropriate accommodations for them. But the other aspect is, just imagine an evacuation. It's not as easy as picking up a kid. Imagine the most vulnerable or the elderly. So we're looking at working with the organizations to start identifying the most vulnerable so that, for example, I was talking to St. John Ambulance, is how can they identify and then be and support some of the paramedics and getting people out. So it's let's put it this way, looking at coordinating their work a lot more better, rather than what we used to have before is, great organizations doing amazing work, something happens, they just showed up, right? So what we're also doing is working and making sure all the agreements are in place beforehand, so when there is an emergency, there is no delay in response.
And I'm also just wondering what we learned last year in terms of the resources that were on the ground, both physical, like human resources, but also physical resources, and what we've added to that from last year in terms of firefighting capacity to be prepared for this year.
I think Jonathan can probably provide more details on this. Well, it's first and foremost is when I say we have to have the right resources, right place at the right time, that's very important. CIFC does that coordination, but the provinces have also been increasing their own capacity on what is needed. And I can tell you that the additional firefighting, increasing firefighters has been extremely important, plus in the Indigenous communities. But one key program that I heard from last year that was having a big impact is actually training the leaders on how to fight interface fires, because you can have as many people as possible, but imagine people who are newly trained don't have the experience and the leadership to be able to take teams. So what we did last year through NRChem is start basically train the trainers. And what they have done is gone around the country is train the experienced people so you can put a 20-person team together with the right resources and send them out. And I'll give you a quick example of how effective and how important that actually is. When I visited a Soyuz, and the wildfire that was coming in from the U.S. moved so quickly that they went from evacuation alert to order literally within the hour. As the local fire department was fighting the actual fire, they didn't even have to request. Resources were pushed down. This team knew exactly what needed to be done, and they integrated so well. But if you didn't have the right leadership there, you would have had a pause in trying to figure things out. And what was really important to me is that the local firefighters dealt with the preventing the homes from being caught. The other firefighters pushed the fire out, and there were fuel tanks that the city has in the industrial park. If those fuel tanks came under threat, they potentially would have had to evacuate the entire town. So that's how effective that leadership training. If that wasn't in place, I would say things could have been much worse. So that was another thing that I would just probably wanted to share as well.
Yeah, just to follow on that, I mean, I think the resources probably are in a couple of different buckets. So the equipment fund that we set up, which is, I think, $256 million distributed directly to provinces and territories, we have put into place agreements with most provinces and territories that have enabled them to draw down on those to actually purchase equipment that will be used by firefighters throughout each of the provinces and territories, so some of the resources there. The training program I referenced, it has gone a lot faster than what we had anticipated, and so there are many more wildland firefighters on the ground. Particularly important are the work that is the work that we've done in Indigenous communities to ensure that they will be prepared. And of course, we will be doing more of that this year. Harj talked about the work with the International Association of Firefighters. There's the wildland firefighters, and then there are the municipal firefighters that actually can be trained to actually work on this interface area. And that has been an enormously important program. And as I said, we've topped money up on that so that that program will continue going forward. And beyond the resources that we have in Canada, there's also how do we actually make things smoother so that we can pull resources when we need them from partner countries that are willing to actually provide those resources. And so we've upgraded some of the arrangements we have, particularly with the United States, to make it easier to actually pull resources into Canada and vice versa when they have challenges. And so to be able to actually augment the capacity that we actually have domestically when we need to.
Matteo, National Observer.
Yeah. I'm just curious about the advance payments. I think you said 160 million. Can you give me a bit more detail on what that is and where that's going and what that's what's that funding for municipalities and First Nations? I don't know if it's just for recovery from last year or if it's for preparedness this year.
In terms of preparation. I want to go back to about 2017 first. 2017 in BC was a significant wildfire season. And again, we heard firsthand from First Nations community that their knowledge base was not being used. And we wanted to change that because not only their knowledge, but their experience allows us to prevent some of those things. So but what they didn't have was the capacity. So what we've done is actually one of the key things is funding the coordinators. For somebody within the community, so who can actually take that experience, coordinate what exactly is needed. So we're not here to say this is how you should pull in what type of resources. They're going to figure it out themselves. And they've done amazing work, for example, in the Chilcotin, and just using BC examples at the Kamloops First Nations. They also created an evacuation center. By the time that the evacuation center was open, immediately it was being filled up with evacuees. Not only the First Nations community has made it available, obviously for all the First Nations community that are within the area, they actually made it available for first responders as well. So this is about how they can work together. How can we integrate a lot of their work? So I would say that the work has started and is going well, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done. I know that Ontario has a operations center within the Indigenous community that works very well. So we're going to be learning from some of their lessons on how it could be applied to the rest of the country as well.
Okay, thank you so much. And so those advance payments are going towards some coordinators. I think your colleague said there was around 13 coordinators in BC. Can you speak a little bit? I know at Alberta, each nation is going to get a coordinator. Obviously, there's a lot of First Nations in BC. 13 seems quite low. Can you speak a little bit about the progress there and if those 13 coordinators are going to be the only ones throughout this fire season?
No, the numbers that, Mr. Haidu obviously would have those numbers, and we'll get you the accurate numbers on this, but I know the numbers are higher. We just kind of give BC's example because, one, they've been prone to a lot of wildfires, and I've been dealing with this in my previous portfolios as well. And but it's about making sure that they have the right the resources. I've seen, and here's the interesting part. One thing that I heard was a lot of the leadership, who are some of those coordinators, were actually the folks that were in the past fighting the wildfires. So they actually have some amazing experience. So we'll make sure you do get those numbers, but one key message I want to send out is their experience has already been utilized in this and helping us not only tackle wildfires, but on the prevention side has been very important.
And if I may, the advance payment go beyond just funding coordinators, and Minister Haidu's department, we will be able to provide you with those details.
I've been told that we have very limited time left, so if you don't mind, keep the question a little short and answers a little short too. David, Thornton, CBC.
I wanted to ask you about wildfire smoke. Does the federal government see any role or responsibility, or is anything going to change this year in tackling that, or is that just something that we can't really prevent? It's just a product of wildfires.
Well, I'll start this if anybody else wants to add on to this. We saw significant issues from last year that I think because in urban areas we've seen so much smoke and it became, but keep in mind as well, the smoke has been there in rural areas for a very long time. I know that Mr. Holland, through his portfolio, is looking at putting out the appropriate alerts and making sure that we have the right, provinces have the appropriate information for putting out the alerts. And then I think what this will allow us to do is making sure that the most vulnerable population can, have the appropriate safeguards. But what I would say is that we are going to have to start looking at this a little in more detail. I know that the federal government I know that certain provinces have already started as well.
And obviously, the best way to limit the amount of smoke is to limit forest fires, therefore being better prepared for forest fire season and learning from past years' experience, which is exactly what we're doing.
But we saw our smoke affect not only our country, but the United States. So is this a diplomatic issue as well? Like, will there be more attempts to control wildfires if they're burning in places that are not near urban areas, but could create smoke in urban areas, including in the United States?
Can I say on this one is part of the prevention is some of the early work that you do on the control fires so that you burn the fuel out. So that's the Fire Smart programs that are taking place. So obviously, as Mr. Guilbeault just mentioned, is yes, you do want to prevent. Sadly, through the various because of climate change, the smoke is traveling and doesn't respect the borders. And as you know, in New York, it did become an issue. But at the same time, yes, we do have those discussions. But at the same time, the way we look at it is I just give you an example of a forest fire that came from the U.S. into us. We can't look at it from a border issue. This is about how do we work together in tackling the impacts of climate change. What I think would like to see is how can we coordinate a lot of this work on health and the potential long-term effects of smoke on humans.
It's actually a really good example of how the effects of climate change actually force international collaboration. I would say it's not a diplomatic issue. It's actually something that is forcing closer collaboration with our American friends, including on things like resources on the ground, including things like satellites, because at the end of the day, the impacts don't know geographic boundaries. And yes, last year it was New York that took the brunt of a lot of the smoke coming from Canada, but I can tell you in British Columbia, we've had exactly the reverse from fires in Oregon, Washington State, and California many years. And so I would say you might want to have a conversation with Ambassador Cohen about this. It has really, accelerated, I think, the depth of the conversations we're having with the United States about how we work together.
But David, at the end of the day, pollution knows no border. And the best way to limit forest fires, beyond doing all the preparation that Arj has talked about, is by reducing our contribution to climate change, something that the Conservative Party of Canada doesn't seem to understand. Like, you make pollution free again, we will have more forest fires. Canada will contribute more to global climate change. You cancel programs on electrification of transportation, we'll continue burning more fossil fuels. You cancel programs on clean technology, on home energy retrofits, it will mean that Canada will emit more greenhouse gas. Like, there's no gray area there. either you have a plan to fight climate change and to reduce Canada's contribution to greenhouse gases emission, or you don't. And if you don't, then Canada will contribute more to global climate change, including the impacts that we're seeing here in Canada.
And just imagine now, right now we're talking about wildfires. In British Columbia, the heat domes killed a lot of people. So the climate change is having a significant impact, within so many different other areas. And as we're talking about wildfires, the main issue that BC and Alberta are talking for emergency preparedness right now is actually drought. So there's a lot of other bigger issues that are taking place right now, and I can't stress enough how important it is to tackle this. And this is something that you cannot leave to the next generation. Just imagine our grandkids and grandkids saying to us 100 years later and saying, what were those people thinking? This is the time for us to making sure that we do get this right, and it's going to take a lot of effort.
On va utiliser les précieuses dernières minutes pour donner la parole aux journalistes sur Zoom. Elisa Serret de Radio-Canada, à vous la parole.
Bonjour, vous avez dit plein de choses intéressantes, mais tout en anglais. Alors, M. Guilbeault, si vous pouvez répondre en français, notamment sur peut-être donc ces paiements anticipés dans un premier temps, dans un deuxième temps, sur l'importance donc de s'attaquer au changement climatique. Vous avez lancé des points à l'endroit de M. Poilievre. Est-ce que vous pouvez répondre en français sur ces questions? Merci.
Première question était sur les paiements...
Anticipés, là, vous avez parlé de 160 millions de dollars en prévision des feux de forêt cette année pour aider donc des coordonnateurs dans différentes régions.
OK, d'accord. Alors, donc, ce qu'on a fait beaucoup depuis l'an passé, c'est d'apprendre des expériences à la fois au niveau fédéral, mais aussi nos partenariats avec les provinces, les territoires et les peuples autochtones. Et il y a plusieurs mesures qui ont été mises en place, soit du côté, par exemple, d'Environnement et Changement climatique Canada, investissement dans des ordinateurs plus puissants pour être capable de mieux déterminer les catastrophes naturelles qui arrivent, mieux les détecter aussi par des investissements de plus de 600 millions de dollars dans la modernisation de notre système de radar. Du côté du ministère de la Sécurité publique et de la préparation aux urgences, des investissements pour former des formateurs sur les feux de forêt qui vont pouvoir aller dans les communautés, travailler avec les gens qui au niveau local, peuvent faire preuve de leadership, peuvent prendre en main des équipes qui peuvent être ensuite déployées pour réagir plus rapidement, pour s'intégrer à d'autres équipes de pompiers, soit volontaires ou des pompiers qui sont déjà formés pour les feux de forêt. On a créé une force fédérale de 200 personnes qui peuvent être déplacées sur le terrain, en plus de travailler avec plusieurs organisations comme l'Armée du Salut, la Croix-Rouge, qui possèdent eux-mêmes des bénévoles qui sont formés pour ça. Alors, il y a une série d'éléments que nous avons mis en place. Pour ce qui est des conservateurs, bien, écoutez, la meilleure façon... Alors, il faut mieux se préparer pour faire face aux impacts des changements climatiques, il n'y a pas de doute là-dessus. Mais si nous ne nous attaquons pas à la pollution climatique, bien, il va y avoir toujours de plus en plus d'impacts des changements climatiques. Plus de feux de forêt, plus de vagues de chaleur, plus d'inondations, plus de tempêtes tropicales. Et c'est une chose que le Parti conservateur refuse d'admettre, refuse même d'en discuter. Si on coupe les programmes pour l'électrification des transports, si on coupe les programmes pour le transport en commun, si on coupe les programmes pour l'efficacité énergétique au niveau domiciliaire, résidentiel, bien, qu'est-ce que ça va faire? Ça va faire que le Canada va devoir brûler plus de combustibles fossiles, va contribuer plus au problème du réchauffement climatique qui crée des impacts ici et ailleurs. Il n'y a pas de zone de gris ici. Soit on est en faveur de la lutte au changement climatique et on déploie ce que Jonathan a dit avec raison comme étant sinon le plan le plus détaillé au monde, certainement l'un des plans les plus détaillés au monde. Pendant ce temps-là, si on regarde du côté conservateur, soit sur la question de la préparation face aux urgences, donc toute l'adaptation, soit sur la lutte à la pollution climatique, c'est silence radio du côté conservateur, et ça, pour nous, c'est inacceptable.
En suivi, Elisa?
Pardon. Non, c'est excellent. Pour moi, je suis en onde dans 2 minutes. Merci.
On me dit que le temps est terminé, mais il y a un média autochtone en ligne. Est-ce que vous prendriez une dernière question, peut-être d'un média autochtone qui patiente? Eric Bowling from Inuvik Drum Northern News. You have the floor.
Hello. Thanks for taking my question. I'm just wondering, in regards to evacuation, since it seems as though it's more of a matter of when, not if. Last year, Yellowknife, when it was evacuated, people ended up pretty much all spread across the entirety of southern Canada, across like multiple cities. So I'm wondering what kind of preparation is being made for small communities, particularly isolated ones, that don't necessarily have road access, like in northern Manitoba and in Northwest Territories, or places that have limited road access, like here at Inuvik, where we had to drive anywhere. It's 8 to 12 hour drive before we hit Dawson. So I'm just wondering what's been done with that.
That's a really good question. When it comes to the evacuations, one of the key things that we learned from last year when Yellowknife was evacuated, and I visited most of the communities afterwards as well, is that we need to, one, have a much better plan in place. One of the key things was that people were, frantically just trying to move everybody out, went to different places. They didn't know exactly where they were, especially where certain vulnerable populations went into areas that didn't have the right support. So one is getting a much better perspective on exactly which community, and if there was a plan to evacuate, where would they go? And those, some of the things through the humanitarian workforce program, we're doing that. We will be doing that, is kind of looking at supporting them in that way. The other aspect is not only planning but conducting evacuations early. Like, for example, right now, as you know, in the Old Crow community, there is no road access, and there's potentially a flood situation that can occur within the next week or two. And I just came from the Yukon to look at their preparations, and they already have plans in place to making sure that the evacuation does take place. And in some communities in Ontario, I think for the first time, evacuations are taking place in just beforehand. And so those are things that we're learning from last year, sadly, from the evacuation of how it took place. Thank goodness that no lives were lost, but obviously still had a significant impact on the population. So that's what we're doing now, is, again, learning from the lessons of last year, is what type of plans need to be in place, what type of equipment needs to be ready. And I would say that things are getting better, and Old Crow is just one example of how we can support the communities at the right time.
Quick follow-up, Eric?
Yeah. Speaking of equipment, I seem to recall at a previous press conference about this subject, it was mentioned that water bombers have a 15-year wait list for new water bombers, I think, or something to that effect. So I'm just wondering if we've been able to locate any sort of alternatives for potential equipment as we go forward.
The territories are looking at their own capacity of what they also need. I can tell you that federally we are looking at a few options. It's too early for me to even discuss looking at some of the alternatives. And this is probably a good example and opportunity to say is the climate change is having an impact all over the world. And the reason why in some cases we have a 15-year wait time for water bombers is because a lot of even the European countries and other countries around the world also need water bombers. Fortunately for Canada, across the country we do have resources, and like I said, I just happened to be in the Yukon just to look at the resources they have. They're also looking at adjusting even how they do contracting. Originally, they're doing like 5-year contracts. They need to look at 10-year contracts. But that's something area that we are actively looking at. And not only about having more water bombers, but having better capability within the water bombers to be able, for example, to fight water bombers, fight fires at night. And the other keen one really want to put some more research money into is how we can use drone technology that can be utilized to fight wildfires as well.
On me dit que c'est tout le temps que nous avons. Merci à tous. Ceci met un terme à cette conférence de presse. Bonne journée.